Howdy readers and howdy film buffs. I'm Jason, this is Chapter and Verse, and this is the quite belated, most recent entry in my best 21st century films I've seen project. So I apologize for the wait, and I really appreciate the patience that those of you who, to put it in the words of one of my subscribers, is really invested in this project and in these recommendations. Thank you so much for that. In this video, I'm going to be covering entries 70 through 61. And remember, this is a ranked list. I will leave links in the description box below to the other videos in the series so far, as well as the introduction video that I did to the series, kind of explaining how many films I've seen at the time that I started the project from the 21st century, and also just kind of I suppose what I was hoping to do with this. But anyway, let's just get right into these. So number 70 is Martin Scorsese's Silence. Now, so my relationship with Scorsese is unlike most people's relationship with Scorsese. Most people regard his crime films to be his best films. I mean, if you talk to 100 serious moviegoers and ask them what their favorite Scorsese films are, most of them are going to say Taxi Driver and Goodfellas. And I don't really like Taxi Driver very much, and I don't like Goodfellas very much, and I don't like Casino very much. And The Wolf of Wall Street, which is a completely different kind of crime, is a film that I actually have no plans to see. So for those of you hoping to see The Wolf of Wall Street crop up on this list, I'm sorry. And the Scorsese films that I am the biggest fan of are Kundun and The Last Temptation of Christ and Raging Bull. Those are probably my three favorites. And then, right after that would be Silence and The Age of Innocence and Bringing Out the Dead. And Bringing Out the Dead, I would say, is a very religious film in its own way, too. But yeah, I love, with Silence and Last Temptation and Kundun, I just love what he does in exploring religion. And this is a movie that I had been so excited to see for so many years. It had been on his slate of projects for a very, very long time. It was originally supposed to star Daniel Day-Lewis and Benicio del Toro and Gael Garcia Bernal, but it was taking so long to get the thing made, and there are many reasons why this was, that those three actors dropped out and moved on to other projects. As we know, Daniel Day-Lewis actually just went and retired after he made Phantom Thread. But when it finally did come out, it came to the Rialto Theater here in town, which is our little art film theater insofar as we have an art film theater. And Kelly and I went to see it with my friend Dylan. Let me just say, this film was a box office disaster, okay? Which on some level isn't much of a surprise. It's almost 3 hours long. It's about Jesuits. It's set in, what century is this set in? I want to say it's like the 17th, maybe 16th or 17th century. And so yeah, I mean, this is not, there are no cars blowing up in this, right? There are no Transformers in this picture. And it was funny when we went to see it. So it was the three of us in the cinema, and then behind us, a couple of rows, and quite far to the right, were the only other two people in the cinema. And it was this old couple. And I would say a third of the way through the movie, they had been kind of just really restless, and there was a lot of, just really deep sighs, and it was clear that they were not enjoying it. And at one point, one of them, like maybe the older lady, started bitching to her husband about the movie, and I just couldn't take it, right? Like at some point I just broke, and I turned around and not even politely at all, told them to shut up or leave, shut up or get out. And so they shut up for a while, for another 30 minutes or 40 minutes, and then it started again, right? the deep exasperated sighs, etc., etc. And eventually my friend Dylan turned around and told them to shut up or leave. And yeah, and they were sort of quiet through the rest of the thing. And then when it's over, like, then they leave and they were grousing, blah blah blah. And I'm thinking, do some homework before you go to the movies, right? If you had done some homework, you would, okay, so this is almost 3 hours long. There's not a crazy Robert De Niro and a kind of vulnerable child Jodie Foster in it anywhere. Yeah, and it's about Jesuits, and it's about the silence of God and the search for God, the way in which God comforts communities. I've heard some people complain about this film, saying that they don't, they can't appreciate or don't even want to see, a film that's about, a Western tradition, a Western religion, imposing itself on an Eastern community. And that's not what this is about, right? If this thing had had a prequel, that's what it would have been about, right? It would have been about the Liam Neeson character and other Jesuits going to these villages in Japan and converting the people there. But that's not what it's about, right? It's about these villagers who have been Christians now for some time and who are living in a world where there is a social structure that seeks to kind of, keep its heel on them and is just deeply oppressive. And the religion is the one thing that gives them some sense of safety and of comfort. And that's really what's going on here, right? And it's about these two young Jesuit priests who go to Japan to find their mentor who has vanished, who has disappeared. And so it's not the thing a lot of people think it is, actually. It's a lot more complicated than that, and it's so beautiful and it's so strange, and it's just a really bold film from one of America's best filmmakers, and it's way better than Taxi Driver or Goodfellas. So that's Silence. Number 69 is Amorous Perros, directed by Alejandro Gonzalez Inarritu. And this came out right at the beginning of the 21st century, and it was actually just released in a Criterion Collection edition, I want to say last month. And this is a movie that is just exhilarating. It's brutal. It's structurally complex. It just has a great deal to say, especially for a debut filmmaker, right? Like, this was his first movie. The guy has gone on to win 2 Oscars for directing. When you look at debut films, right, a little bit like with debut novels, we hear Steve Donahue talking about how much he loves debut novels because it's a blank slate. It's a writer whose work he's never read before, and he can be kind of consistently surprised by it. It also gives him something to look forward to with future novels. But those debut novels also have problems. They also have flaws that tend to be specific to debut fiction, right? Writers who are maybe ambitious to a degree and they don't quite yet know how to wield their ambition or their vision. And you see that as well with debut films. And but I really feel like this thing is so confident and so assured. And as you're watching it, you just, when I first saw it, right? I mean, I think this came out in 2000. When I first saw it, I just remember thinking, holy shit, like, I can't wait to see what else this filmmaker does. And his career has not been a disappointment at all. So, Amorous Perils. If you've seen this, if you've seen any of these, actually let me know what you think of them in the comments below. So that is number 69. Number 68 is a film that I don't own. Kelly and I don't have, so I will put a picture of it right here. I hope I'm putting my hands in the correct position there. And it's a documentary called They Shall Not Grow Old, directed by Peter Jackson, best known obviously for The Lord of the Rings. And it is a documentary film about World War I. And I was fortunate enough to see it at the cinema. And that same cinema that we saw Silence at the Rialto. My friend Dan and I went, and there was quite a big crowd for that film. And what they did. I can't remember if it was the Imperial War Museum or kind of who spearheaded this project and hired Peter Jackson, but they went through hundreds, maybe even thousands of hours of footage from the battlefields, like from the trenches in World War One. Okay, and you got to remember, I mean, this is right at the beginning of cinema. I mean, when you see some of the footage in the film, you see so many of these soldiers looking directly into the camera as they're walking past, and it's because this was an alien idea to them. It was something so new, and what they did was, so they took this old footage, which was very had a kind of jittery movement to it. In part, I think, because of the frame rate, and in part because the film itself was just degraded from age. It was all silent. It was all black and white, obviously, and they developed a technique whereby they smoothed out the jitteriness. They made it fluid. They made it look like it was shot now, and they colorized it, and they brought in, I think, lip readers to see in the rare moments in the film, to see when people were speaking, to try to determine what they were saying. And then they hired voice actors to essentially just, voice those parts. And it is breathtaking. I mean, it literally gives you chills. So as you're watching the film, it's all jittery, it's black and white, et cetera, for the first, I don't remember how many minutes of it. And then mid shot, okay, all of a sudden it just smooths out and goes to color, just bleeds into color, and you feel like all of a sudden you're there, right? That you're not kind of flipping through old, a box full of old reel-to-reel stuff that you found in an attic somewhere, something like this. All of a sudden you feel like you're immersed in it. It comes to life in a way that it's just stunning. I mean, it's literally breathtaking. And I don't know if on the DVD, because again, we don't own it, I don't know if they include this little documentary, but after Dan and I think it was after, it might have been before, but no, it must have been after, because they would have wanted you to be kind of stunned and surprised by what you were seeing. There was a little documentary that they showed, it was maybe 20 or 30 minutes long, that took you through the process of how they did this and how they developed the techniques that made this film, this breathing life into this old footage possible. And it was just wonderful. It was just marvelous, right? I mean, Peter Jackson is always going to be known for Lord of the Rings. But in some ways, I feel like this is his greatest achievement in some ways. And if you haven't seen it, look for it. I think on Amazon Prime right now here in the States, I think you can stream it. I think you can stream it as a rental for 99 cents right now. Don't quote me on that, but the last time I checked a couple of weeks ago, because Kelly hasn't seen it yet, and Kelly and I are going to watch it soon because she's going to be reading Parade's End, or starting Parade's End by Ford Madox Ford in February. So she thought this would be a good film to kind of launch her into that. So anyway, have a look for it. That's number 68, They Shall Not Grow Old. Number 67 is another film that we don't have. We actually have it in a single, a single case with, it and its sequels, et cetera, but the sequels aren't really anything to write home about, and so at some point we're gonna purchase it as a standalone, if that can still be done. So my number 67 film is Ocean's 11, directed by Steven Soderbergh. And this is a movie that, some people might be surprised to find it on a list like this, right? Because there's nothing profound about Ocean's 11 at all. There's nothing deep about it at all. It is a pure popcorn, candy floss entertainment, right? But that's what I love about it, right? I think that those kind of films, right, pure entertainments, right? Think back to the 80s. Think about something like Romancing the Stone, directed by Robert Zemeckis. And I feel like it's in many ways it's every bit as difficult for a director to hit a movie like that out of the park as it is for a director who's trying to do something that's kind of architecturally more complicated and thematically, kind of richer and darker and stranger, more mysterious. I think for a filmmaker to just give us something that is like just a shot of adrenaline, right? And I've talked about this in some of the other videos, right? If cinema were turned into a kind of drug that just made you feel bright and alive and filled with joy, Ocean's 11 would be one of those movies. And it's just perfectly acted. It is put together just like a well-oiled machine, and there's really nothing wrong with it. Any complaints I have they're so tiny, right? I mean, for instance, when George Clooney is put into that room, locked in that room with that brawler guy at the end, and there's guards right outside the door. And, the guy's supposed to be just kicking the shit out of him for, a good length of time, 45 minutes or an hour, something like this, and instead, the guy, is involved somehow in the heist, right? And so he hits him a couple of times or whatever, but then helps him kind of escape, right, if I remember right, through the ceiling panels. And, but at some point, we're outside the door where the guards are, and we can hear them inside. So the guards would be able, if they can hear the fighting going on and the groans from George Clooney, et cetera, they would be able to hear George Clooney and this guy talking about, oh, I'm sorry if I hit you that hard, blah, 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 and helping him escape. And then of course, when Andy Garcia comes and goes into the room and George Clooney's back in the room, and he's supposed to have been getting his ass kicked by this giant dude for the last hour or whatever. The fact that his bow ties, or his ties undone, his ties undone, and he's clearly been hit once or twice, but he would have been pulped to a greater degree than he actually was. So my complaints with the film are just little tiny things like that, right, where I just have to suspend my disbelief and just kind of go along for the ride. But yeah, Ocean's 11 is just great Fun. Coming in at number 66 is 28 Days Later, directed by Danny Boyle. So I'm not really a zombie movie guy, right? I've never seen an episode of The Walking Dead. And I've just really, even like the old, George Romero films, like I've just never cottoned on to those. I've never really understood the appeal of zombies. And then I saw this right around the time when it first came out, when it first, hit DVD or what have you. And I thought it was genuinely terrifying. And I still think this thing is, every time I watch it, it's not that it creeps me out or anything. Like, it's terrifying, right? And it's not the zombies themselves. It's what a situation like that, right? So a plague of hatred, something unleashed on the planet that's turning some people into literal monsters running around raving they have no cognitive ability at all, right? They're just kind of brain-eating machines. But there are other people who evade that somehow, who are turned into something that's much more monstrous and insidious. And that's really what this film is about, right? It's about trying to preserve your life from one kind of monster and finding yourself under the control of, maybe is the best way to say it, a completely different kind of monster. And the film is just absolutely brilliant, right? I love the way it's shot, right? I don't know if he shot this digitally or what have you, but there's something just really kind of matte and, kind of kinetic, I suppose, about the cinematography in this thing. And it's got great performances as well, right? Cillian Murphy and Christopher Eccleston. What is her name? Naomi Harris, who was in Moonlight, nominated for an Oscar in Moonlight, who's in the Daniel Craig James Bond films. And it's just a hell of a horror film. Just a hell of a movie. And it's got one of my favorite endings as well, right? And I won't spoil the ending, but suffice to say, like, we see characters spelling a word on a hillside, and I thought they were spelling something other than what they turned out to be spelling. And the tiny revelation of that, it just, I mean, took the film and raised it to yet another level for me. And I just thought it was just kind of perfect. It's one of my favorite horror films of all time. So 28 Days Later. 65. So I was just talking about Robert Zemeckis with Romancing the Stone, early 80s, Robert Zemeckis. And Robert Zemeckis is the director of my next film, number 65, and that is Castaway with Tom Hanks. One of my great regrets in my movie-going life is that I never saw Castaway on the big screen. I'm sure it came to my town or whatever, but I just missed it. I just thought, well, I'll get to it eventually, and then it was gone. And then when I saw it, when it came out on DVD and I finally got to see it, I just couldn't believe how good it was. I couldn't believe how good Tom Hanks was in this, right? And he was already a 2-time Oscar winner by this time. He'd won Oscars for Philadelphia, Forrest Gump. I would not have given him the Oscar for either of those 2 films, actually. In 93, let's see, when he won it for Philadelphia, I would have given it to Anthony Hopkins for Remains of the Day. And then in 94, when he won it for Forrest Gump, I'm not sure who I would have given the Oscar to that year. But anyway, I'm not a huge Forrest Gump fan. But Castaway, right, it's such a simple story, right? It tells the story of this man who works for FedEx. And, he's got a fiance, and his life is just, things are going well for him, right? And he does his job well. He does it efficiently. And he's on a flight, a FedEx flight, right? I mean, he's transporting packages. And right at the beginning of the film, the plane crashes. And it's where we get the title of the film, Castaway. He is washed up on this little lonely outcrop of an island. And famously, so he's kind of pudgy, right? Tom Hanks put on some weight for the role. And then Robert Zemeckis shut production down so that Tom Hanks could lose the weight that he would need to film the later scenes on the island, right? That take place years later. And Tom Hanks, I mean, I don't know what he subsisted on. I don't know if he just for nine months to a year just ate nothing but lettuce and peanuts or something. I have no idea. I'm sure he was under the supervision of a doctor. But he lost a lot of weight. And he grew his hair out, right? And they bleach it, right, to look like he's been in the sun for years. And the film is just, it's just kind of a miracle. It's kind of a miracle of a movie. It's perfectly judged, right? Everything about it is perfectly judged, and that's a rare thing with Robert Zemeckis. There are some Zemeckis films that have a lot of problems, in my view. It's so incredibly moving, and my favorite thing about this movie, right? And I mean, let me know if this is something you think about as well. But I love the music in this film. I love the score. And we don't hear, if I remember correctly, we don't hear any music at all for the first, I mean, I don't even know how long in the film. And then the first time we hear what will become kind of the main theme in the movie, I mean, it just brings tears to my eyes, right? I talked in the video I did recently with Lukash, where we watched The Best Intentions, based on the Ingmar Bergman novel about his parents. We talked about how the score in that film was so simple and just so distilled and just a handful of notes and so perfect in that way, and that it just captured precisely what the characters were feeling, what their situation was. And the main theme in this, the score in this as well, is so spare and so just perfectly judged. I think I used that phrase already talking about this film, but it just moves you so, and it's so simple, right? I mean, oftentimes film music is big and it's kind of instructing you what to feel, and the music in this is Alan Silvestri composed the music for this. Yeah, Alan Silvestri. I can't imagine any other music in this film, and I can't imagine this film without that music. The other thing I'll say too is that, as with 28 Days Later, this has one of my favorite endings of all time. You know what I'm talking about if you've seen it. There's something, I love it when that kind of boundary between you as a viewer and the character as an entity, as a consciousness within the film. I love it when the veil between those things falls. And there are many ways to do that, right? To make what do they call it, breaking the third wall or whatever. Was it the fourth wall? I'm not sure. But to make the film self-reflexive, right? It becomes aware of itself as a movie and invites you in and makes you a kind of participant in the film. And the final shot of this movie does that. And it does it maybe better than I've ever seen it done in a movie. And Castaway is absolutely magnificent. Just magnificent. And Tom Hanks should have won the Oscar for this. Russell Crowe won the Oscar for Gladiator, but it should have been Tom Hanks. Next up at number 64 is Jane Eyre, directed by Kari Joji Fukunaga, who's actually directed the most recent James Bond film, which was supposed to come out last year. Then it was supposed to come out, they pushed it because of COVID, and it was supposed to come out this spring, and they've recently pushed it back, I think, to the fall now. And, this is probably a smart idea. But yeah, I've seen many adaptations of Jane Eyre, and this is probably my favorite. Although Ruth Wilson in the BBC film is probably my favorite performance as the character Jane Eyre. But anyway, so when this came out, this was released by Focus Features in 2011. And I didn't think it was going to come to Casper. Okay, I didn't think it was going to come to Casper. And so my friend Paul lived in Cheyenne at the time. And the nearest city that I could find it playing in was Boulder, Colorado, which is, how far is that from Casper? It's like 3.5 hours, something like that from Casper. And so I asked Paul if he would want to go see Jane Eyre with me, right? And I think he had just read it recently and really, really liked it. And so I drove and picked him up in Cheyenne, and we drove to Boulder. So I drove round trip 7 hours to see Jane Eyre on the big screen. And then a couple of weeks later, Kelly and I were going to Cheyenne to see family and friends. And Jane Eyre was playing in Fort Collins, which was closer, much closer, right? It's just on the other side of Cheyenne. And it was at this little art house theater that we had never been to, and they served, tapas, and they served alcohol, and it was cool. And so Kelly and I, with Paul and his then wife, drove to Fort Collins to see Jane Eyre again, right? So second time for Paul and me, and first time for Kelly and Paul's then wife. And then probably 3 or 4 weeks after that, Kelly was on a trip to Boston for work. She was there for a conference, and she was gone for, 4 or 5 days, I think. And Jane Eyre came to Casper, and I went to see it again by myself. So I saw this in the cinema 3 times in 3 different cities, which is kind of crazy. But it's just beautiful, right? Mia Wasikowska is just, she's just wonderful as Jane. There's something so kind of guarded about her, and when she lashes out, when she gets, allows rage to kind of, and resentment to kind of crop up in her, it's really powerful. Not just because she's been so, kind of quiet up to that point, but it's more than that. She's got this guardedness to her. And then, of course, Michael Fassbender as Mr. Rochester. I mean, Michael Fassbender, it's crazy that he hasn't won an Oscar yet. It's just really nuts, actually. And he's fabulous as Rochester. It's got Judi Dench in it as well. And, it just works. This movie just works. So, Jane Eyre. Let me know what your favorite adaptation of Jane Eyre is in the comments below. Let's see, and then next is another film like Amorous Perils from the very beginning of the 21st century, and that is Before Night Falls, directed by Julian Schnabel. Now, this is a movie about the Cuban poet and memoirist Reinaldo Arenas, and this was kind of the breakout film for Javier Bardem, and I mean, of course, we've seen him go on to not only win an Oscar, but just do extraordinary work, right? And things like Skyfall and No Country for Old Men. But he was nominated for an Oscar for this. Now, this was directed by Julian Schnabel, Julian Schnabel is a filmmaker who is also a painter, right? He's really, really well known and well respected as a painter, as a visual artist. And I'll tell you what, Julian Schnabel's paintings suck, man. He is a horrible painter. I mean, you hear jokes all the time, right, about some modern art, and you go into go to exhibitions at the Museum of Modern Art or what have you, and there's a canvas, that's just all white and it has a yellow circle on it or something like this. Steve Donahue will rant and rave about art like that, and Julian Schnabel is that kind of painter. I hate his paintings, but he's a really gifted filmmaker, just a supremely gifted filmmaker. His sense of how to use music, how to use a composer in the film is just extraordinary. And this movie has just some really interesting casting choices, right? It's got Johnny Depp in it and playing two parts. Sean Penn has just a tiny role in it. He's in one scene. He's almost unrecognizable in that scene. But it just works somehow. And this is a film about institutional oppression, right? It is a film about sexual awakening. It is a film about a homosexual man trying to find his way in a world that is hostile to him. And not only to his sexuality, but to his instincts as an artist, right? You get the sense, especially in scenes where he's where he's a child, that how his mind works and where his sensibility kind of goes as an artist is frowned on somehow, that there's something feminine about it or something offensive about it. And this is just a beautiful, beautiful film. I haven't taught it in this sort of strict sense of the word before, but back when I used to teach creative writing, there were a couple of semesters. Well, at the end of the semester, I would show a film to my students just as a kind of way to end it all and kind of celebrate the act of writing and the artist's mind. And there were a couple of semesters where this was the film that I chose to show my students at the end of the semester. So Before Night Falls is just absolutely magnificent. So much better than his paintings. Two more to go. So coming in at number 62 is another Tom Hanks film, and that is A Hologram for the King, directed by Tom Tykwer, based on the Dave Eggers novel. When this came out, I did not think this would come to Casper. This was a pretty small release, especially for a Tom Hanks movie. And but it came to Casper, and I had not read the novel at that point. But I thought it looked good. It looked interesting. So Kelly and I went to see it. And so the main character in this, right, he's a salesman, right? I mean, he in some ways, he's a kind of marketing salesman, and that's what I do for a living. And I just identified with this thing on so many levels, and was just really taken aback by it, and really transported and kind of enchanted by it. And as soon as it was over, we left the cinema and we stopped at the library on the way home, so I could get the book, and I started reading the book that night, and I loved it. And when I finished the book, I ordered it online, and yeah, it's just a tremendous movie. And some people, it's weird, right? So I have a friend who's really, really film savvy, really, really film smart, a former student of mine, and she fucking hates this movie. I mean, with a passion. And I've read some other stuff online, right? A lot of kind of vitriol about the film, and it's weird. I'll be really curious to hear what any of you think about the movie, and also, if you can, let me know how old you are, because I feel like this is a film that is somehow, it's really divisive along generational lines, and I'm not 100% sure why that is. But younger people tend to, millennials tend to really not like this movie, in my experience. Whereas people, Generation Xers like myself, tend to really respond to it and tend to really identify with this man who feels a little bit lost and is going through something of a kind of midlife crisis. As far as its themes go, we see that actually explored here recently in the new Disney Pixar movie Soul. There's a kind of similar thing happening with the character. But yeah, I think this movie is. I think it's funny. I think it's sad, and I think it's really tender. There's something just kind of tender and brave about this film. But yeah, like I said, it's really divisive for some reason. But let me know what you think of it, and let me know how old you are as well, so that I don't know, I can begin formulating a theory as to why reactions to it are what they are. So, Hologram for the King. And coming in at number 61, my last movie in this video is Gareth Edwards' film Rogue One, A Star Wars Story. And so here's the thing, okay, about Rogue One and about Star Wars, my relationship to Star Wars. I've only seen this once. I saw it in the cinema. And I have yet to watch the Blu-ray, which we've owned for years now. But this is the Star Wars movie. Of all Star Wars movies that I've seen, and I'll get to more of that here in a second, that I think about the most. And I'm not 100% sure why that is. But the film just feels so honest, and it feels like a film about risk, but about integrity as well. And I'm not just talking about the story, I'm talking about the making of it, okay? So this takes place prior to the events of Star Wars A New Hope, right, which was the very first Star Wars movie. Came out in 1977. My first memory of life, actually, is my mom carrying me across the street after we parked to see Star Wars. I was, I think, two or 3 years old. That was my very first memory of life. I collected all the Star Wars toys when I was a kid. I wish I still had all that shit. I wish it was all still in the package. I don't have any of it anymore. I had the ships. I had the Darth Vader action figure carrying case. I had so much. I had like a little baby Ewok stuffed animal. Yeah, I was a Star Wars freak when I was growing up. So much so that when The Phantom Menace came out, I was one of those people who stood in line for fucking ever, opening day, and I hated The Phantom Menace so much that I didn't even see the other two films, which are, I think, Attack of the Clones and Revenge of the Sith. Still haven't seen them. One of the reasons I hated The Phantom Menace so much is because it set so much ahead, so far ahead of where Star Wars A New Hope is set, that the technology, the fashion in the film, everything stylistically in the film should feel like an earlier iteration of what we see in Star Wars A New Hope. But no, George Lucas, was like, I'm directing again, and I have a huge budget, and I just love CGI, and I'm gonna do whatever the hell I want. And so he made The Phantom Menace look like, it was taking place 1,000 years beyond Star Wars A New Hope, right? Everything looked so much more sleek and sophisticated and advanced, and that's not how it should have looked. And I was worried when Rogue One came out, because this is set right before the events of Star Wars A New Hope. Like I said, I was really worried that this film was going to fall into the same trap that George Lucas had fallen into, and it was going to give us clothing, costumes and technology and weaponry, etc., that didn't feel of a piece with Star Wars A New Hope, right? That was going to feel more advanced somehow, and it doesn't fall into that trap at all. And that's what I'm talking about when I say the film has integrity. It knows its place in that universe, in that Star Wars universe, and it fills it out so beautifully. And the film is tragic, and it is. It's just really, really bold and brave, and I love it for that. Don't get me started on the most recent trilogy, right? I really loved The Force Awakens, and I disliked enough about The Last Jedi that I have yet to see. Was it The Rise of Skywalker? I think is the third one, but anyway, yeah, Rogue One, man, it's the Star Wars film that takes up the most space in my head, and it does so, I think, because it feels like a human drama more than it feels like a science fiction film, and it's more interested in telling a true and complicated and beautiful story than it is in you paying lip service to fandom or what have you. And it's magnificent. It's so much better a film than The Last Jedi. And I realize there are people out there who yeah, would not only disagree with me, but we get aggressive about it. But those people are wrong. So sorry, Rick. Anyway, Rogue One, and that's it, everybody, for this installment of the series. Again, I said this before. I'll try not to let so much time go by. But I'm getting back in the saddle with making videos on a more regular basis. So fingers crossed. But thanks for joining me. And once again, let me know what you think of any of these things down in the comments below. And I will talk to you again very soon. Adios.